Welcome to everyone who's joined us today on our By the Book YouTube channel. I'm absolutely delighted to have Nuala O'Connor join me today. And Nuala is the author of several books, including Nora. And welcome to the conversation today, Nuala.
Thanks a million.
So your book, Nora, has been particularly successful. Could you tell us a bit more about the book itself and maybe some of the things you've been doing in particular this year in relation to the story behind Nora?
So the book is about Nora Barnacle, the Galway life partner of James Joyce. And it's about from the time they met on this, well, the first time they walked out on the 16th of June, 1904, to Nora's death in Zurich in 1951. So it goes through their early love, their marriage, having their children, all of his drinking, his writing, and all of the moving around they did in Europe. And it's a love story of them, but also of them and their children. So yeah, it's Nora's point of view. It's a first person point of view. And she was a very pragmatic, earthy, sort of cheerful person. So she was a great foil to Joyce, who was more sensitive, more nervy, a bit trickier around people. So they were a good match.
And where did your interest, I suppose, well, one in Joyce come about, and two, subsequently Nora?
Well, I grew up in West Dublin, and my parents loved books. So there was always Joyce's books in the house, and I read a lot as a child. I suppose when I moved to Galway 25 years ago, I became more aware of Nora's part in the story. There was an annual gathering at her mother's house in Bowling Green here in Galway City. And I used to go to that every Bloomsday, and there would be drinks and songs, and, you know, it was lovely. And you could visit the little museum, which is just 2 rooms. And then I was studying Italian by night, had to write an essay about Joyce's time in Trieste, and just found my research just kept pulling me further and further towards Nora and further away from Joyce. And so it became like I had adopted a cat who I had named Nora Barnacle. And so, you know, Nora's been in the ether. I had read Maddox's biography of her. I had seen the beautiful film by Pat Murphy and Jerry Stembridge. So I was very aware of her. And then I guess it just took me, I don't know, 23 years to realize that I wanted to write this book or something like that.
Wow. So was that 23 years of research, or just, it was supposed something in your head? How long would the actual research have taken?
So I suppose I'm writing seriously about 24 years, and I have Nora is my 5th novel. It's my 3rd biographical novel. So I've written one about Emily Dickinson, the American poet, one about Belle Bilton, who was a music hall dancer who married into the Irish aristocracy. So Nora sort of came into view as the type of subject that I'm interested in, a maverick woman from the past. And so the idea, I suppose, to write about her seemed very apt. I'm a dub who lives in Galway. So I had 2 sort of strands of myself to pull from, as well as all my experience writing these kind of books about historical women who have been smudged by history. So she was a great subject for me to latch onto. I don't research and then write. I research a little and then start to write, and then I do the rest of the research in tandem with the writing. So all in all, I suppose it took, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, 2 maybe.
Okay. And it's won a few, I suppose, awards or recognitions, I might say. Congratulations on all of those. So one of them being the One Dublin One Book. Yeah, so how did that come about, or what's the background to getting that status?
So I suppose our 2022 is the 100th anniversary of Ulysses being published in Paris. And so they wanted, One Dublin One Book is a UNESCO City of Literature initiative run by the libraries in Dublin. And they wanted to choose a book that spoke to Joyce, but that also brought women to the fore. That was the idea this year. So my novel Nora was published last year in April in Ireland and in January in the US, and it just was a good fit. So basically there was a call for submissions this, as far as I know, all of this happens in the background. Your publisher does all of this stuff. And my publisher submitted Nora as a candidate for the One Dublin One Book choice for 2022. And it fit with the whole Ulysses 100 theme. So I was very lucky. Now, I was aware before the book came out that it was the 100-year anniversary of Ulysses this year. And I had said to my agent, you know, when you're pitching this book to editors, make sure to mention that, you know, 2022 will be a big year for Joyce. And so there will be extra interest in the book. And it turns out, yeah, I was right.
Yeah, there has been. And what have you been involved with so far with the One Dublin One Book?
Well, really, it's a month-long series of events that happens in April. But for Ulysses 100, I have an exhibition that I curated at the Museum of Literature in Dublin called Love Says Bloom. And it's about the love between the four Joyces and Giorgio's son, Stephen. So the five of them really, and music. So I've done a story of their love with music through music. And I worked very closely with the museum there and the technical people there, and we hired musicians to sing for us, and it's an audiovisual experience. So there's that exhibition that was launched on the 2nd of February, which was the anniversary of Ulysses coming out. And then for One Dublin One Book, we launched the programme last Thursday in Dublin. So it's online now. All the events are free, but you can book them. So they're basically in libraries, they're in museums. We have an event in Epic, we have an event at Molly, the Museum of Literature. We have the big sort of gala night in St. Anne's Church on Dawson Street towards the end of April. So basically it's a celebration of the book, but also the people around the book, like Joyce, excuse me. So for example, with the Little Museum of Dublin, I'm doing a talk with Deirdre Brennan, the photographer, about her contemporary photographs that are inspired by Ulysses. So it's a mix of things between the book itself and Ulysses 100 things, you know, things to do with Joyce and Nora that are of interest to readers. So the idea is that people will read the book, have conversations around the book. I'll be talking to a lot of book clubs. There's 3 international events. There's London, where I'm going to London to the Literary Society there to talk about the book. I'm going to Monaco at the end of April to the Princess Grace Library to talk to people there about it, and there'll be dramatizations as well. And the other international event is Warsaw, and that'll be online. So yeah, it's a great, a very busy, very full-on celebration. A lot of events for me, like I'm 5 days a week on the go in April, but it's brilliant, and it's a real shot in the arm for me as a writer, for Nora, my book, and for my publisher. New Island, who are a small Dublin publisher. Most publishers in Ireland are small. Some of them are branches of bigger publishers in the UK, but you know, New Island is Arts Council funded. So something like this means a lot to a small publisher.
Yeah, you've definitely taken it onto a global platform, which is brilliant. And it is lovely to see Nora, you know, come forward into the story as much as Joyce. And I suppose just to get that recognition for her part in, you know, I suppose his success.
Yeah.
What would have struck you then when you were doing your research? Was there anything in particular that you came across that hadn't been uncovered before, or anything in particular that was striking about the story?
I think I was kind of very familiar with the bones of the story about his drinking and how they never had any money until he found fame. And then it was through sponsors rather than earning it as such. I suppose when I started the book, I didn't realize how much time I would spend on the relationship between Nora and her daughter, Lucia, who was diagnosed as a schizophrenic in her 20s, late teens, early 20s. But that became a huge piece of the book for me because it's such an important relationship, the mother-daughter relationship. And Nora has been criticized in the past by people who felt she wasn't fully there for Lucia, but I didn't find evidence of that in my research. And so I wrote their relationship differently to how it has been portrayed by other people. I suppose people always ask you this thing about what surprised you. In a sense, nothing about human nature surprises me. So, you know, I was rolling along with it and accepting everything that was going on. I had forgotten that Nora had had cancer. So that kind of drew me up short when I rediscovered that in my rereading of the biographies and that. survived cancer. They had a lot going on. Joyce had very poor health. His eyes were disastrous. He was almost blind. He had to use a magnifying glass for reading. Sometimes he wrote on large sheets of paper with crayons because his eyes were so bad. He'd be in terrible pain. You know, he'd have to be in a darkened room. He'd wear eye patches. His glasses were very thick because he needed them. So through all of that, he wrote Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake. He had stomach problems. As a drinker, he didn't like to eat much. And so he actually died of a perforated ulcer. So there was a lot of ill health between Lucia, Joyce and Nora. And then Giorgio, who disdained drinking for all of his young life, basically turned into his father and became a drinker. So yeah, and had a marriage with a woman who also suffered badly with her mental health, and that marriage broke down. She was sent to the States to a sanatorium. He stayed in Europe. Their son Stephen went back and forth. So a very disrupted life for all of them, really.
And did he ever get on top of his drinking?
No.
Okay.
Even at the end, when they were in the south of France, just before they went to Switzerland in World War II, and he died very shortly after they got there, he was drinking Pernod on an empty stomach, you know. So no, he didn't.
God, that's awful. Yeah, tragic. A tragic story in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so if we could go back then, Nuala, a bit in time. So you said 24 years, which is an incredible career in writing. Was there anything before writing for you, or was it always just writing was what you did?
It was what I wanted to do. I mean, I think it's very difficult when you have no role models to know that it is actually something that can be done. When I was a child, I kept a diary. I was always writing poems. I had a lovely teacher in Scolwera in Dublin who encouraged me to enter a national poetry competition. So I had this poem that I wrote about travellers. It was written in Irish. I was in a Gael school. And she encouraged me to enter it in this competition run by an organisation called CARE. They no longer exist. And I came second, and Michael Hartnett, the poet, was the judge. And I remember my mother's reverence around Hartnett. We were brought to RTE to record the poems. We were brought for a lovely sort of gala lunch or whatever, you know. It was such a big deal. And that made a huge impression on me that, yeah, I think it showed me as a 9 or 10-year-old that writing could be important and was important. And I was always very drawn to words and language. I went to school through Irish. I had my home life through English. I was a reader, shy, introverted, bit of a loner, spent a lot of time reading and wandering about on my own. I'm from a big family, so I had company in the family, and we had a few neighbours. We lived in a kind of a tucked away part of Dublin, the Liffey Valley, which is not actually a shopping centre, it's a place. The shopping centre was named after the place. So yeah, I was a very bookish child. I was good at school. I liked school. I went to college and studied Irish. But all that time I was kind of writing away, mostly secretly kind of in my teens, with this ambition to be a writer, but no clue as to how to do it. And I worked in libraries and bookshops, all the bookish things. I worked in a writer's centre. I came to Galway to work in a theatre. And it was really in Galway that I encountered my first, well, it wasn't the first time I had met real live writers, but it was the first time I had them as colleagues, I suppose, because when I was in Trinity, I used to organise Aiksha with Uncommon Gaelic. So we used to invite writers to come and read for us. But even in college, they felt like very lofty people, very other, very sort of, I presumed they were all very middle class and very wealthy, which turns out not to be the case at all, you know. But when you're a working class kid and you don't know any writers, they don't seem like real people somehow, or it doesn't seem like a real career option or path. And in a sense, it still isn't, in the sense that you can't make a living from it. Genuinely, it's extremely difficult to make a living from writing. So came here, met writers, sort of mumbled that I was writing too. They were very encouraging, said, oh, join a workshop, join a group. You know, they gave me very practical solutions, other than sitting at home writing by yourself and hiding it and not showing it to anyone. So I did a couple of workshops, one with Mike McCormack, fiction, and one with Louis Dupuer in poetry. Both of them were brilliant, met lovely people, and we formed our own writing group. And I think that was really the genuine start of it. That was 24 years ago or something, or 25, I can't remember now, 26 maybe. And with that group, we became each other's encouragers and supporters. And, you know, one of us would hear, oh, such a magazine is looking for poems, why don't you send some in? And we'd all send them in. And, you know, that sort of thing is a great way to start out. And then from there, I was writing a lot of poetry, a lot of short stories, and I started to write a novel. And then I met a small local feminist publisher here in Galway. And he said, oh, if you have enough poems, like about 60, send me a manuscript. And so I did. I was working in a bookshop at the time, and he wandered into the bookshop, and I sent it in and he took it. So I published 4 books with them, Ireland House. And I had my novel ready, and he said to me, listen, I don't have the resources or whatever, or the promotional, you know, money to promote a novel. Go and get yourself an agent now. And so I did. Unfortunately, I was 5 years with that agent, and he didn't manage to sell the book. So it was very frustrating. So from the time I finished the book to the time it got published actually took 7 years. And I ended up placing it myself with New Island. I did eventually get a very good agent, and she's really changed everything for me in the sense that now, excuse me, I can earn a modest living from writing. She's Irish, but she's in the States. So she sells my books first to the New York market and then sells them here. And so there's more money in the States. Advances in the States would be way higher than they are here, you know, because our publishing community and publishers are small and they can't afford to pay big advances, you know, and it's an issue because it means that anyone who is very serious and very committed to the idea of being a writer goes outside of Ireland to earn a living, in the sense that they're publishing first in the UK or the States or whatever. And that's hard for the Irish publishers who find and nurture you, and then you kind of leave them, you know. So when Nora was coming out, I had 2 offers. I had an offer in London and I had an offer in Dublin. And I said to my agent, I think it's much more important that this book is published in Dublin. And I chose to publish with New Island again. So I've done, I think, 5 books with them now. Because even though it's sort of fancy to have a London publisher, and I did a London publisher for my last novel, there's a sort of a distance in a way. When you publish with someone in Dublin, there's a camaraderie and a friendliness that is just, it's a sort of an Irish bonding thing. It's so much easier to sit and go and meet them for coffee and talk to them and be in the office and stuff like that. So that has really worked out. It's a great relationship with New Island, and they just go from strength to strength. And I'm so full of admiration for them as a team. They're a very good team and a very dynamic team. And I love working with them, and hopefully we'll continue to work with them.
Yeah, no, I've been following you both on Instagram, and yeah, no, they've done a really, really good job. And I saw as well, there was a Ulysses book as well that came out with them this year.
Yeah, Daniel Mulhall, the ambassador. I think now I might be wrong. He was or is the US ambassador for Ireland. Yeah. You know, the Irish ambassador in the US, I mean. And I got that book. It's brilliant, actually. So it's a guide to Ulysses, but it's a personal response to Ulysses, but it's also an extremely readable and useful guide. I'm enjoying it. You know, I dip in and out of it. I've tons of books, as you can imagine, about Ulysses and about Joyce. And it's a matter of trying to find a place for them here, you know, and rather than buy or build more bookshelves. So.
Yeah. Just going back to some of the things you said there, because I think it's good advice for others. So 2 things that kind of struck me, you know, for other writers starting out, was one, being part of the writers group was really important from a support point of view, but also finding the right agent. There you kind of touched on. So they'd be 2, would you agree they'd be 2 very important things for anyone starting out or with a novel that might be ready to go?
Yeah, I think what's fantastic now is there are opportunities now that didn't exist when I was starting out. So the Irish Writers' Centre, again, it has come on in leaps and bounds under the stewardship of Valerie Bastani. So there's fantastic opportunities there, like the Novel Fair, which is an annual fair for writers where you submit I think it's 10,000 words of a novel. And if you are one of the 12 winners, you are brought forward to meet a panel of agents and editors and publishers, about 16 or 18 of them, and you get to pitch your novel. So it's almost like blind dating for novelists. It's just a stunning opportunity. And it's every year. So you know, there's always a good chance with that. There's also a lot more workshops now, a lot more variety of workshops. So there are workshops not just to do with the craft of writing, but to do with things like social media, you know, self-promotion for writing, how to present yourself as a writer. Lisa, I can't remember her surname just now, Harding is running that in the Irish Writers' Centre just now. So there's all sorts of opportunities that exist now that weren't there, and avail of them. The Arts Council as well has sort of streamed their funding in different directions. So there are a lot more opportunities for new writers now, and there are supports for writers who are more long in the tooth like myself. So there are things that you can avail of everything that's open to you. Finding a writing group can be tricky because you want the people in the group to be, in a sense, at your level and as serious about writing as you are. So you don't want a group that's just about drinking tea and eating cake and gossiping, you know, or drinking wine, whatever people want to do. You want a group that's serious about the work. And so it's a good idea to go to a lot of workshops and a lot of groups and see what suits you the best. Like, it might be that you're the type of writer who only likes to be with one or two other writers, and you feel these are people that get you and get your writing. So be dynamic, set things up. I've spent my life setting things up, like writing groups, and you know, when I found there was a gap for me, I would set something up. So try and be that person. Like, I am shy and I am introverted still, but I also know what I need, you know, from the writing life and from other people, and I know when to reach out, and I think that's an important thing. Don't be too isolated. You know, writing is an isolated thing in and of itself, but there's a great community out there that you can tap into.
Mm-hmm. The
thing about the agent is trickier because it can take a long time to find the agent that's right for you. And it took me 3 shots, you know. It's a relationship. People have differing opinions on this. I personally think it has to be like a type of friendship, in the sense that you are not afraid to say things to your agent. You're not afraid to ask questions, that the lines of communication are wide open. Like, I had an agent who I was afraid to contact because they might get a bit cranky. They did get a bit cranky. That's not what you want from your agent. You want an agent who, when you send them an email, responds to you. You know, it's a business relationship, but it's also a friendly relationship. So your agent has to be great at the business side, but also great with people skills and great at, you know, helping you. And writing is, you know, I think it's probably seen still by a lot of people as a flaky endeavor that doesn't deserve to be paid, but it's not. It's a very committed thing, and it's definitely a life. It's like a calling, but it does deserve to be paid. And also it deserves levels of professionalism that sometimes don't exist. So you need to demand professionalism as well from people that you're working with, not demand in a narky way, but, you know, everybody in the bargain has to be professional, and that includes you. So you don't harangue your agent, you don't hassle them, you don't have crazy expectations. Like, you're not going to earn a lot of money. That's just a fact. Even people who we would look at and say, gosh, she's really successful. You know, whoever you want to think of, I don't know. I'm not going to speak for people because I don't know their wages, but I'm just saying people that look like they have hugely successful writing careers are not earning huge amounts of money. You simply can't. It's not possible, you know. Mm-hmm. So have modest expectations. I would say, if at all possible, have some other part-time work that can support you. As we know, rent, cost of living, and all of that is just getting worse and worse and worse. Have some sort of part-time income, ideally, that you can, you know, tap into, but don't try, you know, it's very difficult, but full-time work, you're going to find it very difficult to fit your writing in. If you can have some sort of like 2/3, 1/3 scenario whereby you use 1/3 of your time for writing, that's the ideal. It's hard. It's really hard. supportive spouses like mine are absolutely brilliant. I live in East Galway because we can afford to live here, because we don't have two large incomes coming into our house. And it can be a matter of that. I know a lot of writers have moved to Berlin and Eastern Europe purely because the rents are affordable. And it's only by living in those places that they can write. You don't have to go abroad, but you can look at where are the cheapest places in Ireland to live and move to them. I know writers who've moved south to Wexford, writers who've moved northwest to Leitrim, simply because those are places that they can do what they want to do, work part-time at something and write. It's difficult. I dread nowadays when I'm invited in to talk to a master's group of writers and, to talk to them about what does the future hold for you now. It's becoming so hard to earn a living. I mean, I don't just purely sit and write. I also mentor a lot of other writers, and I'm paid for that by Words Ireland and by the Irish Writers Centre. I write reviews for places like the Irish Times. I teach at literary festivals and things like that. I do events that are paid events. I'll be paid a fee for each of my events for One Dublin One Book, for example. So these are the ways that you generate income. But unfortunately, the more of that you do, the less time you spend writing. So you have to be very skilled at carving up your time and devoting proper amounts of time to your writing so that you can get it done. It's tricky. The Arts Council has bursaries, of course. Always look into those. But yeah, it's a kind of a constant hustle, and that gets very tiresome. And I think it's one of the things that people don't understand, that not having a steady income is actually a huge stress on people. So never knowing what your income is going to be from month to month or year to year is actually very stressful. And it's one of the reasons that a lot of people don't stick with writing. It's actually just too much stress on them. They can't pay their bills and it's just not a possibility. And I see a lot of writers fall away for those kind of very practical reasons. So I really welcome the idea of this universal artist income. And I'm really hoping that it takes off and that the pilot is a generous pilot scheme that really takes into account that there are artists at different stages of their careers, that beginning artists are just as important as artists who are in the game a long time. So I hope there's a holistic look at that. And I'll be interested to see where that goes, because for me and for many writers and other types of artists, the money thing is the biggest stress. It's the reason art is not getting made to the extent that it could be. We're a very creative community in Ireland, always have been. Creativity just seems to be part of our DNA or something. But making a living is nigh on impossible. And I hate delivering that bad news to people, but unfortunately, it's the truth.
No, it's such a good point, and one probably that doesn't get addressed enough. And just when you said there about going into the universities, I mean, that's I suppose the stage to tell people without crushing their dreams.
I know. But when I go into NUI Galway, the director of the program always says to me, now be really honest. And you feel like, oh God, I'm just going to stamp all over these poor young people. Well, some of them are not young. Some of them obviously are older starting out. And I love seeing that. I'm going to stamp on these poor new writers' dreams, I just, like, in one way, you don't want to be delivering that bad news, because there is the odd person, obviously, that will soar. But I mean, even like, I suppose the only newsworthy things we hear are the writers who've got a 6-figure deal and these kind of things, and they're only newsworthy because they're so exceptional. Most advances are very, very small. I was talking to someone the other day and I was saying that they were asking about different things. And I was saying Aosdána is, I think, unique to Ireland, where people who have had a career are elected to this sort of higher level of creatives. What would you call it? Group, institution, I don't know what you'd call it. And I was saying that there's a stipend that they get. And the person who has a job, a real job, was saying to me, oh, how much is the stipend? I said, it's about 20 grand a year. And they were like, that's not a lot of money. And I was like, but for an artist, that is a good bit of money. to get per year. And also it takes the stress of the hustle away from you. If you know you have 20 grand this year, at least you can plan. Whereas most of the time you can't plan because you just don't know what's going on money wise, you know. And I think that even people that should know, like this person, I know them well, and I would have thought they understood my situation, didn't understand at all, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's definitely a good thing to bring up. I haven't actually spoken about that topic in any interview, and it's really good that it is addressed. And I suppose, yeah, it's just with, like, I've, you know, my own opinions is as well that it's such a seasonal business, and that's really tough as well, where you have this spike in sales for a period of time, you know, but then that doesn't necessarily last, maybe, you know, for the full year. You can't, as you said there, it's very difficult to plan. You can't plan out those 12 months the same, because some months will have the spike, and then you have obviously seasons like Christmas where you have this spike again, and then a very quiet January or February. And I suppose that's a bit challenging as well.
But the other thing is, like, you only have a book out every 3 or 4 years. Your advance is long gone by the time the book comes out. And then you have this kind of 6-week sales window where your book is reviewed and people may or may not buy it. You only get €1 per book anyway. So you'd need to be selling thousands and thousands of books to earn a living in that way. I mean, it's not really possible or feasible. And I think people don't know that and don't understand it. And maybe don't care, because we do have a habit of lauding dead writers rather than living, breathing, working writers and supporting them in proper ways. You know, all writers need is time and, you know, a bit of money to support them. Like, we're not greedy. We can live in modest ways. And most of the professional writers that I know do live in modest ways, you know, and I think that's a perfectly good and sane way to live, is to live quietly and on a modest income, be able to produce the art that it is your business to produce. Like, heart and soul, this is the thing that makes me happiest. It's the thing I'm good at. I just love it. I love nothing more than me and the page, you know. Mm-hmm. I'm writing a novel just now, and I was back at it this morning, and like, I just couldn't be happier. It just lifts me in the way. I was going to say nothing else does. I do have children and a husband that I love, and, you know, and I have cats and I have extended family that I also love. But there's just something about me and the words and the page that is just so, it's just like a core part of me that can't be extinguished and won't be. Even if I didn't get published again, I would still write, you know.
That's lovely. Yeah, that's really nice, the way we've taken the conversation from something which is challenging, obviously the financial, but at the same time you've put a light on why people do it and why it's sort of part of you, and money can't buy that. Just what you've described on the other side of it. I'd like to ask then, just over the 24 years then, what would you say would have been a highlight of your career, or equally a low point to your career over the 24 years?
I suppose the 7 years waiting to get my first novel published was quite disheartening, you know, because I never stopped believing in that novel. Actually, it's called You, and it's written in the second person. It's set in Dublin, and I'm really very fond of it, and I was delighted it got published eventually. I think I'm 52, so my generation, there was this narrative always abroad about us that we didn't produce any great writers and there was nobody really writing very seriously. Like, the fact is, we were here, we were writing, but we were being largely ignored. So I think there's a lot of trends in publishing about who it's fashionable to publish and who it isn't. And it can be very upsetting when your whole generation is written off as not very, you know, great, when we were here busily writing away, being quite good actually, and just weren't getting any recognition. And I'm grateful to the women who came before me, the Mary Morrisseys, Anne Enrights, Mary O'Donnell, Evelyn Condon, Eilish na Grivna, Catherine O'Donnell, Leah Mills, all those Irish women writers who went before me, who were my goddesses, who were the women that I revered and who were kind to me as I came up. And, you know, it was so important for me to see them writing, to see them publicly reading, to hear them talk about writing, because they made it possible for me. And then the next generation after have had huge success because it was fashionable suddenly to publish women writers, young writers. But I hate the way we are sort of ignored as if we didn't exist. So that has been a low thing in my whole 24 years, that my generation wasn't properly recognized, that one or two writers were held up as Irish writing and the rest of us could go to hell. That's annoying. And I know it's annoying for the women who were in their 50s and 60s and 70s, who also were eclipsed by the male writers who were lauded and held up. But also some of the younger women writers don't seem to know or read the women who are literally just in their older 50s, 60s and 70s. So I will never miss an opportunity to big up those women because they were so important to me as a fledgling writer. Lowlights were times when I just could not get a publisher, when I was without an agent. You know, a lot of disappointment. It is a business of major disappointments, and you have to just love and adore the pure act of writing above all else, because the publishing industry is very fickle, very fake, very trend oriented, very led by media and celebrity and all of that. And it can be intensely disappointing. I teach a lot of workshops. Well, I used to teach more. I don't do it so much anymore because it's so time consuming, but I would teach a lot of workshops around the country, or have done over the years. And I've met so many wonderful writers, you know, men and women who can really, really write, who are really good, have beautiful novels ready to go, and they simply cannot get anybody to publish them. And I find that quite devastating, you know, quite upsetting. And there's only so many rejections some of these people can take before they stop believing in the work, stop believing in their own abilities, and just stop completely. And I find that very sad. I wish there were better supports in place, in the sense of the industry not being so celebrity led and fashion led, and you know, if one sort of book is a hit, let's just publish loads of them. You know, there needs to be a broader look at the types of books that we are allowed to write, in a sense, and the types of books that get noticed. So there's a bias against quite quiet books that I would like to see changed. You know, the small publishers do all the heavy lifting when it comes to interesting work. Mm-hmm. And as I was saying earlier, then that interesting work, as soon as it becomes, what would you say, notorious or well-known or well-liked, then the bigger publishers swoop in and grab those writers away. And you can't blame the writers. They want to make a living. And if they can only make a living by being published by Faber or Canongate or whoever, well, then you can't blame them for going in that direction as well. But it leaves the Irish publishers constantly starting out maybe with debut people all the time. So that's tricky too. It's not that you've caught me on a bad day. It's just that it's a very tricky business. It's a very tricky business. And the older I get and the more time I spend in the business looking at it, trying to understand it, because it's kind of unfathomable at times, the more disheartened I feel in a way. I know there are a lot of opportunities that are wonderful, but like, how many careers are being supported past the first book? There are an awful lot of debuts, and then you don't see a lot of second, third, fourth, fifth books from people. So what we need to look at is the supporting of careers into longevity, the supporting of writers as writers who can write for a long, long time, you know. Mm-hmm. It feels funny to use the word career because career implies status and money, and like generally writing doesn't give you either, you know. Yeah, mm-hmm. It's a tricky business. I don't know, like, you know, one of my kids is a scientist and one is a computer programmer. And the youngest now is a kind of very arty one. And I'm sort of wondering, will she go towards the more sciencey end of life or maybe computers, or will she follow me into the arts? And like, I won't be able to change what's in her deepest core and what she wants and needs, but I do fear that if she goes into arts related work like what I'm doing, I'd worry about her future as like, where can she live and all of that, so this is awful depressing. I'm so sorry, but it's something I think about a lot, and I talk about a lot with various writer friends, and
no, it's a good conversation to have.
We're all just kind of hustling, trying to figure it out.
No, I appreciate your honesty. And as you touched on, I mean, the cost of living in this country, it's rents and, not to mention now the way the fuel's going. So whatever challenges were there before financially, they're only getting more difficult for people.
Yeah. I mean, will there be any artists who are starting out left living in Dublin? I just, how can they live there unless you bought a house there 20 or 30 years ago? You can't move there. You can't survive there as an artist paying €2,000 a month rent plus. It's just not possible. It's impossible. So I think there has been an exodus, and I think that will continue, because I certainly couldn't afford to live in Dublin again, much as I might like to, I can't. So, that's a strange one as well.
And then I suppose if we were to finish up the conversation, just on some, now you have touched on a few good points, but what would be the main piece of advice that you would give to someone who's starting out?
Advice. Are any of us qualified to give advice to anybody? If you love it, and it's something, if writing is something you can't not do, if you know what I mean. If it's the thing that makes you happiest in the world, do it and pursue it, but be dynamic. Tenacity is a huge part of this game. Sticking with it, continuing on in the face of rejection. Look for partners who you can collaborate with that also bring you joy. So you can do projects like, if a friend of yours is a visual artist, that you write poems or stories inspired by their work and put on your own exhibition, where you have your poems or stories framed on the wall beside their artworks. Be grassroots. If you see a gap in the market, fill it. I noticed that there was no dedicated flash fiction magazine in Ireland, and I'm a flash fiction nut. I love it. Very short stories. And so I set one up. So always be willing to do the things that you think are missing, and find ways to connect with other writers. Support your friends. Don't befriend other writers wondering what they can do for you. Support each other to bring each other forward. Definitely avail of what's on offer at the Irish Writers Centre. There's all sorts of projects that they come up with all the time. Like, they did a brilliant one, and they still do these, where you get to meet your writing peers from Northern Ireland, and you do exchanges. Things like that are very enriching, and you never know what will grow out of them. So avail of opportunities. If you haven't checked out the Irish Writers Centre website, do so now. Poetry Ireland as well, umbrella organisation for poets, wonderful resources on their website. If you want to get an agent, have a full manuscript ready. Don't send out queries if you're not ready yet. Wait until you're ready. And then find out who are the agents of the writers that you admire and like. Agents are hungry to take people on. It's not that they're trying to bat people away. They're really interested in new voices, particularly if you have something slightly off kilter or unusual to say. So if you're from a minority community, or, you're doing something unusual with your prose or whatever. So think about the things that you're passionate about and write about those and promote those in tandem with yourself. It's a very friendly community in Ireland. Generally, people tend to support each other. and want to support each other. And so you'll find friends within the writing community. And I think that's one of the huge bonuses of it, and always has been.
Oh, that's lovely, Nuala. I've taken so much away from that. Really, really, really good conversation, because on one hand, you're straight to the point, you're realistic, and you're not, glossing over, the important side of the financial aspect of writing. But equally, I can tell you've such a passion there, such a love for it, and you've given such a good advice there for anyone starting out or considering it as a future. You mentioned that you have a second, you're writing your sixth would-be novel.
Yep.
You might just, I suppose we could just finish if you wanted to let us know anything about that, or when that's due to come out.
Well, I don't sign multi-book deals because that's like an axe to your neck. So I go one book at a time. So I don't have a deal for this. So I haven't a clue when it's coming out. I'm writing a novel about the Irish pirate Anne Bonny, who was allegedly from Kinsale in County Cork. It's 300 years ago, so it's very hard to get concrete details. And a lot of the stuff that's written to her about her is kind of absolute rubbish. So you're wading through a lot of nonsense. So actually, even though it's based on a real person, I have a lot of freedom to invent here. And so that's what I'm doing. She ran off to the Caribbean and became a pirate. So she was quite the woman. Super enjoyable to write and research, and going down mad rabbit holes of, the slave trade and all of this sort of stuff. Very interesting, very enjoyable.
Brilliant. Sounds brilliant. And is your main social media platform, would that be Instagram?
Instagram and Twitter.
And Twitter.
Yeah. Used to do Facebook, just find I don't really like it that much, so I sort of steer clear.
Yeah. Well, look, Nuala, it's been an absolute pleasure, especially to talk to you on World Book Day as well.
Yes. And I have a World Book Day giveaway on my Instagram, actually. My giveaways tend to last about a week. So if this is released anytime soon, and I do giveaways a lot, of my books, and I've lovely Nora notebooks at the moment that I'm giving away. I have tickets to Molly, the Museum of Literature. So yeah, follow me on Insta and avail of a giveaway. I'm very happy to do them.
Brilliant. Look, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks,
and
Rachel.
All your lovely advice. I look forward to watching it back myself and re-listening to some of the stuff that you shared with us. I wish you every bit of success going forward. And it's just been so nice to meet you, and I do appreciate your time as well.
And you, Rachel. Thanks
today. Thanks, Nuala.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Bye.